November 1942, North Africa. An American infantryman braces behind a supply truck as a desert wind suddenly roars to life. Within seconds, the world vanishes into a swirling red cloud, a full sandstorm. He reaches for his brand-new U.S.-issued dust goggles, equipment every soldier had been told would solve the desert warfare problem. He tightens the strap, lowers his head, and instantly loses all vision. Not from the sand, from the goggles themselves. In less than 30 seconds, the lenses turn into two white circles of fog. He's completely blind at the worst possible moment. So he does what thousands of other American soldiers would do that month. He rips the goggles off and faces the storm bare-eyed. 3 miles away, inside the same storm, a German soldier adjusts his dust goggles and keeps walking. No fogging. No struggling. Perfect visibility. American troops couldn't understand it. Same desert, same heat, same storm. So why were their goggles failing instantly while the German ones worked flawlessly? It wasn't luck, and it wasn't superior materials. The answer came down to one small detail. A detail U.S. engineers noticed, dismissed, and never corrected until it was too late. To understand how America missed something so simple, and why that mistake affected thousands of soldiers in North Africa, we need to go back to the beginning. Before we can understand what went wrong with the goggles, you need to understand what kind of war was being fought in North Africa. This wasn't the trench warfare of World War I. This was something entirely new. Mechanized warfare across distances that would have been unthinkable just 20 years earlier. Tank columns stretching for miles, supply convoys crossing hundreds of miles of open desert, motorcycle dispatch riders racing between units, separated by vast empty spaces. Everything depended on movement, on speed, on visibility. An army that couldn't see where it was going, that couldn't navigate, that couldn't spot the enemy at distance. That army was finished. And North Africa had a weapon that could blind an entire army in minutes: the sandstorms. These weren't inconvenient weather events. They were combat conditions as dangerous as artillery fire. Fine desert sand driven by winds that could hit 40 miles per hour or more. Storms that could last hours, sometimes days. Sand so fine it penetrated everything. Vehicle engines, weapon mechanisms, radio equipment, and eyes, especially eyes. A man caught in a full desert sandstorm without eye protection could be rendered combat ineffective within minutes. Temporary blindness, severe irritation, eyes swollen shut, medical evacuation required. And that's if he was lucky enough not to be driving a vehicle or operating weapons when the storm hit. Every army operating in North Africa faced this same problem, but not every army solved it the same way. The Germans understood the challenge early. By 1940, when they first began serious planning for North African operations, their quartermasters had already identified eye protection as critical equipment. Not optional, not supplemental. Absolutely critical. They developed dust goggles specifically for desert conditions. Simple design, cellophane lenses, elastic strap. Compact enough to fold into a paper envelope and carry in a pocket. And they worked. German tank commanders could wear them for hours during sandstorms. Dispatch riders could cross 50 miles of open desert in harsh conditions and maintain clear vision the entire time. Scouts could keep them on during patrols without discomfort. The goggles became standard issue, reliable, trusted. German soldiers learned they could depend on this equipment. But here's what's important. American intelligence officers knew about these goggles. They'd received detailed reports. They'd examined captured samples. They knew the German goggles worked. So what did America do? They decided to copy them. The logic was sound. Why reinvent something that already worked? Take the German design, replicate it, get it into production quickly for Operation Torch, the massive Allied landing in North Africa scheduled for November 1942. American engineers received their assignment in early 1942. Create dust goggles suitable for desert warfare. They had months to get it right. They had captured German samples to study. They had all the information they needed. The result was the M1943 dust goggles, folding design similar to the German pattern, adjustable elastic strap, clear or tinted lenses depending on the variant, compact carrying case, professional appearance, combat ready. They looked almost identical to the German goggles. Almost. American engineers had replicated nearly everything visible about the German design: the shape, the materials, the folding mechanism, the strap system. Everything you could see by looking at a German goggle, the American version had too. Nearly everything. By summer 1942, the M1943 goggles were in full production, thousands being manufactured, ready for deployment. The Quartermaster Corps considered it a success story, identified a need, designed a solution, got it into production, all in record time. On paper, everything looked perfect. In climate-controlled factories during brief quality control tests, the goggles performed exactly as expected. Boxes of them were loaded onto ships bound for North Africa. American soldiers would finally have proper eye protection for desert warfare. Except they wouldn't. Because something was wrong. Something the engineers had missed. Something that wouldn't become obvious until soldiers tried to actually use these goggles in the conditions they were designed for. And when Operation Torch began in November 1942, that something would become immediately painfully clear. November 8th, 1942. Operation Torch begins. Over 100,000 American and British troops land on the coasts of Morocco and Algeria. The largest amphibious operation attempted to that point in the war. Among their equipment, thousands of brand-new M1943 dust goggles, fresh from the factory, never used in combat conditions, never really tested in actual desert heat. The first units move inland, through coastal areas, into the interior, toward the desert proper, where the real fighting would happen. Weather conditions during the initial landings were relatively mild. Some soldiers tried their new goggles. They seemed fine, adequate, good enough. And then the first major sandstorm hit an American column. That's when hundreds of American soldiers discovered the same thing at the same moment. The thing the engineers had missed. The thing that would plague American forces for months to come. The goggles fogged instantly. Not gradually, not after extended wear. Instantly, within 30 seconds of putting them on in hot conditions with any physical exertion at all. And once they fogged, they stayed fogged, completely opaque. Two white circles of condensation that made the wearer totally blind. Picture the scene, a mechanized column moving through the desert, storm brewing on the horizon. The order comes down, goggles on, button up. Prepare for reduced visibility. Soldiers pull on their M1943 goggles. Within seconds, drivers can't see the vehicle ahead. Vehicle commanders can't read hand signals. Scouts can't identify terrain features. Radio operators can't see their equipment. The entire column is effectively blinded by their own eye protection. So they made a choice. All across North Africa, American soldiers made the same choice. They took the goggles off, put them away, faced the sandstorms with bare eyes, squinting, tearing up, getting sand in their faces, temporarily blinded by debris. But at least they could see something. Blurred vision beat no vision at all. The M1943 goggles went into packs. into equipment bags, sometimes thrown away entirely. Soldiers learned quickly. Don't bother with the goggles. They're worse than useless. Meanwhile, and here's where it gets truly frustrating, German troops defending Tunisia continued using their dust goggles exactly as designed. No problems, no fogging, no removing them during storms. The same desert, the same temperatures, the same sandstorms, but completely different results. American soldiers noticed. How could they not? When you're squinting through a sandstorm with watering eyes while the enemy seems to have no visibility problems at all, you notice. When American forces captured German supply depots, something unusual started happening. Soldiers would bypass ammunition, food supplies, even weapons, and head straight for the dust goggles. German goggles became prized items, traded for, bargained for, hoarded. Units that acquired them didn't turn them into supply. They kept them. Passed them to scouts and vehicle commanders and forward observers. Anyone whose job depended on clear vision got one of the German goggles if the unit could manage it. Some enterprising soldiers started doing direct comparisons. Take an American M1943 goggle. Put it on, instant fog. Take it off. Put on a captured German goggle. No fog, clear vision, perfect functionality, same soldier, same conditions, same moment, completely different results. The question became unavoidable. What were the Germans doing differently? By early 1943, the reports were flooding into quartermaster units. Not isolated complaints. Systematic problems reported from multiple units across the entire North African theater. Soldiers refusing to wear the M1943 goggles. Officers requesting German pattern replacements. Medical reports about eye injuries from sand exposure because soldiers couldn't use their issued eye protection. Field commanders started asking questions. Logistics officers started investigating. Engineers back in the United States received urgent queries. What's wrong with these goggles? Why do they fog? Why do the German ones work? The engineers had captured German goggles to study. They'd had them for months. Some of the original samples used to design the M1943 were still available for examination. They looked at them again, measured them, tested them, compared them directly to the American version. The American goggles sealed tightly to the face, firm rubber or foam cushioning, minimal gaps. The design philosophy had been straightforward. Better seal equals better protection. Keep the sand out. That's what matters. The German goggles were similar in most respects. Similar cushioning, similar seal, similar materials. But when engineers looked closely, really closely, they noticed something. Something small, something that seemed almost insignificant. But they still didn't understand what they were looking at. Not yet. While the investigation continued, the war went on. American forces pushed deeper into Tunisia. Fighting intensified, sandstorms continued, and soldiers continued fighting at a disadvantage. Every sandstorm meant the same choice: blind yourself with fogged goggles or face the storm unprotected. Neither option was acceptable. Both options reduced combat effectiveness. The medical consequences started adding up. Eye irritation, temporary vision loss, infections from sand exposure. Soldiers requiring treatment for conditions that proper eye protection should have prevented. These weren't catastrophic casualties. No one was dying from goggle failure. But combat effectiveness was being degraded. Mission readiness was being compromised, all because of a piece of equipment that was supposed to help. The pattern was undeniable. The numbers were clear. The M1943 goggles were failing. Not occasionally, systematically, across the board, in exactly the conditions they'd been designed for, and German goggles kept working perfectly. What were the Germans doing that American engineers had missed? By mid-1943, American engineers were conducting systematic testing, not the brief quality control tests from before, real testing, extended wear in hot conditions. Physical exertion while wearing the goggles, attempts to replicate actual combat situations. The fogging problem was easy to reproduce. Put the goggles on in hot conditions, move around, exert yourself. Within seconds, fog, every single time. Completely predictable, completely repeatable. The physics were straightforward. Human skin produces moisture. Heat increases moisture production. Physical exertion increases it even more. In 100-degree desert heat with soldiers loading equipment, running, operating vehicles, moisture production went way up. That moisture had to go somewhere. In the M1943 goggles, it couldn't escape. The tight seal that was supposed to keep sand out was also trapping moisture in. That moisture hit the lens surface, condensed, and created instant fog. Now the engineers looked at the German goggles again, with this new understanding, looking specifically for how the German design handled moisture, and that's when they finally saw it, really saw it, understood what they were looking at. The detail that had been there all along, the detail they'd noticed before but dismissed as unimportant, the detail that made all the difference. But we're not there yet, because understanding what was different was only the first step. Now American engineers had to figure out how to fix the problem. Design a new goggle, test it properly this time, get it into production, distribute it to troops. All while the North African campaign continued. The redesign work began in late 1943. Learning from the German design, understanding now what had been missed before. Creating something that would actually work in the conditions soldiers faced. Testing this time was thorough. Multiple prototypes, extended wear tests, heat chambers, humidity chambers, physical exertion while wearing the goggles, everything the original M1943 should have gone through before deployment. By early 1944, the new design was ready. The M1944 dust goggles, round air vents with protective metal mesh, improved cushioning, better foam padding, and most importantly, a proper ventilation system. The M1944 worked. Field testing confirmed it. No fogging, clear vision even during extended wear in harsh conditions. Everything the M1943 should have been from the start. Production began. Distribution started. Soldiers who received the new goggles reported complete satisfaction. Finally, American troops had eye protection that actually worked. But here's the bitter irony. By the time the M1944 reached full production and distribution, the North African campaign was over. Had been over for months. Allied victory in Tunisia came in May 1943. The Desert War that exposed the problem had already concluded. The improved goggles would see use in Italy, in the Pacific where volcanic dust created similar problems. In training exercises, they worked everywhere they were deployed. But for the soldiers who'd fought through North Africa with failing equipment, for the men who'd squinted through sandstorms because their issued equipment failed, the solution came too late. So what was it? What was the one small detail American engineers noticed, dismissed, and never corrected until thousands of soldiers had paid the price? Ventilation holes. That's it. That's what made the difference. 10 small holes punched into the German goggles. 5 along the top edge, 5 along the bottom edge. Small perforations, positioned specifically to maximize airflow across the lens surface, large enough to allow air circulation, small enough that sand particles couldn't easily penetrate, located at the top and bottom to create natural convection as warm, moist air rose and escaped. The American M1943 had no such holes. None. The design was completely sealed. That tight seal was deliberate. American engineers had seen the ventilation holes in the German goggles and made a conscious decision. They'd decided the holes were a design weakness, an invitation for sand intrusion, something to be improved upon by creating a tighter seal. They were catastrophically wrong. The holes weren't a weakness. They were the entire solution to the moisture problem. They allowed trapped heat and humidity to escape, prevented condensation buildup, made it possible to wear the goggles for extended periods in extreme heat. German engineers knew those holes mattered because they'd discovered it through extensive field testing. They'd tried designs without ventilation, documented the fogging problem, engineered a solution, tested that solution, refined the positioning and size of the holes through multiple iterations. Only then had they deployed the goggles to troops. The 5 holes along each edge weren't random. They represented systematic engineering, real-world testing, learning from failure, refining until the design worked. American engineers had skipped that process, rushed from concept to production, made assumptions about what mattered, assumed that what they could see, the tight seal, was more important than what they couldn't immediately understand. The airflow physics. The M1944 goggles incorporated proper ventilation, round vents with protective mesh. Similar principle to the German design, but adapted for American manufacturing. Air could circulate, moisture could escape, lenses stayed clear. 10 small holes. That was the difference between functional equipment and failure, between soldiers who could see clearly in sandstorms and soldiers who had to remove their eye protection and face the elements unprotected. The cost of getting it wrong can't be fully calculated, not in dollars, not in casualties. The effects were more subtle, more dispersed, but very real. How many soldiers developed eye problems from sand exposure because they couldn't use their issued protection? How many near-miss accidents happened because drivers couldn't see clearly? How many tactical opportunities were missed because scouts and observers couldn't maintain visibility during storms? Think about the individual soldier's experience. Every sandstorm, every time visibility dropped, every time conditions turned harsh. He faced the same impossible choice: wear goggles that blind him completely, or face the storm unprotected. Neither option was acceptable. Both degraded his effectiveness. Both increased risk. And this happened hundreds of times across 18 months of desert warfare. Some soldiers tried to modify their M1943 goggles, punched holes themselves using whatever tools they had, field expedient solutions, desperate attempts to make the equipment work. Most of these modifications failed. The holes were too large, positioned poorly, let in too much sand, or they were too small and didn't solve the fogging problem. Getting it right required engineering knowledge soldiers didn't have. Meanwhile, German soldiers continued to trust their goggles completely. No hesitation, no modification needed. The equipment worked as designed. That confidence mattered, not in any single engagement, but cumulatively. One more thing that worked when it was supposed to. Today's military eye protection reflects lessons learned from failures like the M1943. Modern combat goggles feature sophisticated ventilation systems, anti-fog coatings applied to lens surfaces, carefully engineered airflow channels, advanced moisture management. Current specifications require extensive testing, extreme heat, high humidity, rapid temperature changes, extended wear during physical exertion. Everything the original M1943 should have gone through before deployment. No military engineer today would create sealed goggles without proper ventilation. The lesson has been learned. institutionalized, built into procurement requirements and testing protocols. But that lesson was learned the hard way, learned by soldiers who squinted through sandstorms, who traded cigarettes for captured German equipment, who filed complaint after complaint about equipment that didn't work. The M1943 dust goggles serve as a lasting reminder, a cautionary tale, about rushing engineering solutions, about assuming visible features are all that matter, about the difference between copying what you see and understanding what you're copying. German engineers understood their equipment worked because they'd done the hard work up front. Testing, iteration, refinement, learning from failures before deployment. Those 5 ventilation holes represented multiple rounds of systematic engineering. Each hole was there for a reason, positioned deliberately, sized appropriately. American engineers saw those holes and thought they knew better, thought they could improve the design, thought a tighter seal was the answer. They were wrong, and American soldiers paid the price. When the M1944 finally reached the troops, the response was immediate and positive. Here was equipment that actually worked, that did what it was supposed to do, that soldiers could trust. No more impossible choices during sandstorms, no more removing eye protection at the worst possible moment, no more squinting through harsh conditions while your issued equipment sat useless in your pack. Soldiers who'd fought through North Africa with failing equipment must have felt a particular mix of emotions when they finally received goggles that worked. Satisfaction that the problem was solved, frustration that it took so long, bitterness that the solution came too late for the campaign that needed it most. The men who'd improvised with captured German equipment, who'd traded for goggles that worked, who'd learned through hard experience that small details make all the difference in combat equipment. This wasn't the only procurement failure in World War II. The jerry can story followed a similar pattern. American copies of excellent German equipment that somehow missed crucial details, equipment that looked right but functioned poorly. But the dust goggles stand out because the solution was so simple, so visible, so obviously there if anyone had understood what they were looking at. 5 small holes. That's all it took, 10 perforations in cellophane. Understanding those holes mattered, required seeing beyond the surface, required understanding condensation physics, required thorough field testing under actual combat conditions, required willingness to learn from those test results even if they contradicted initial assumptions. German engineers did that work. American engineers didn't. The difference was measured in fogged lenses and compromised vision across an entire military campaign. The story of World War II dust goggles isn't really about American failure or German superiority. It's about something more fundamental, more universal. It's about the cost of rushing engineering, about the danger of assumptions, about what happens when the people designing equipment don't fully understand the conditions where that equipment will be used. It's about the difference between looking at something and really seeing it, between copying a design and understanding why that design works. 5 ventilation holes. 10 small perforations that made the difference between functional equipment and failure. That was what American goggles missed for nearly 2 years. That was what cost thousands of soldiers clear vision during the North African campaign. The men who fought through those sandstorms understood this lesson intimately. Every time they removed their fogged goggles, every time they faced the storm unprotected, every time they saw German troops operating with clear vision while American equipment failed, they learned what every combat soldier eventually learns. In warfare, details determine outcomes, not just the grand strategies and major battles, the accumulated small advantages and disadvantages that determine whether a soldier can see clearly when it matters most. The dust goggles of World War II remain a stark illustration of that fundamental truth, a reminder that sometimes the smallest details matter most of all, and that those details are only visible to engineers willing to do the hard work of thorough testing, honest assessment, and systematic refinement before putting equipment in soldiers' hands. 10 holes in cellophane. That was the difference, and thousands of American soldiers in the North African desert learned its importance through direct experience. If this deep dive into World War II engineering and combat realities got you thinking about the small details that changed history, hit that like button and subscribe. Next time, we're looking at another piece of forgotten gear that changed desert warfare. You won't want to miss it.